Hello, can you hear me? And that was a perfect lead-in for what I'm going to talk about because the most people know what I do because I've been a band director for so long, 32 years, but 30 years here. But they don't realize where I come from because I don't talk about it. And they also don't realize what I have a special attachment to this community and also the American Legion. And so I've never been in the military, and I have so much respect for you, and so much respect for the people that are in this room and the people that are out there doing their jobs today, because we wouldn't be here without you. And so I talk about those kinds of things with my students on a regular basis, especially getting ready for Memorial Day. So many students come up and go, well, we always go camping on Memorial Day. You know, I can't make it to that one. And I said, some of these people died for your country. They died so that you can have Memorial Day. Spend a little bit of time in the auditorium and actually do something giving back for everything that you have given to us. So that's a little bit of part of it. But I want to tell you a little bit about where I come from, just so that you know why I do what I do. As a boy, I grew up in the UP, Upper Michigan. And my father worked at Scott Paper for 36 years. During that time, he missed or was tardy only 3 times in 36 years. He would always show up to work an hour early because his philosophy was, if I'm on my way to work and I see somebody stranded on the way to work, he said, I'm not going to not stop. I have to help them. That's who I am. And so he would always go to work an hour early, even if he didn't have to. He'd get to work and he would talk to the guys and things like that, and then he would punch in when he was supposed to. So he worked many, many years for Scott Paper. My mom was, these are her words, don't yell at me. My mom was a housewife. I know that's a bad word these days, but that's what she called herself. She said she was a housewife. We had a 3-bedroom ranch house up in the UP, and as soon as our family started getting bigger, we have 2 girls and 2 boys, sort of the perfect family. And so my dad one week decided we need another bedroom in this 2-bedroom house. We're going to make it a 3-bedroom house. So he called up his brothers and they started doing their carpentry and doing everything else and building it from there. We went camping every weekend. My mother loved to go camping. She loved to be outside. She loved to be camping and always having a campfire. And she would teach me about nature, and she would teach me about what was going on, with the weather and the trees. And she was just really into nature. She loved her kids, and that was really something that we always did. So every single weekend, my dad would come home from the mill. My mom already had the trailer packed. Remember, there's 6 of us. And she would already have the entire trailer packed to go camping that weekend. And so my dad would get home and he would throw a bunch of extra tools into the car, and then we'd all cram into an 1964 Ford Falcon. Remember the Falcon? Yeah. And we had a little pop-up trailer, and we would always go camping. We were always out there having a great time. So in hindsight, some people say, well, you really grew up like the Ozzie and Harriet kind of family, and I said, well, it was a little bit more like the Beverly Hillbillies, but that's just my point of view. So my mother grew up very poor. Her father used to, her whole family were all musicians. There wasn't a lot of money, especially during the Depression and all that kind of stuff with musicians, and so they would always, can I get rid of this? I'm going to go over here. As a teacher, I like talking to my people. And so my whole family was they were all musicians. My great-grandparents came over from Sweden, and they were all musicians, and they would all play for their supper, meaning that they would play for every wedding, they would play for every bar mitzvah, they would play for anything that was going on. They were the musicians. And so my grandfather was the head of the musicians union, and he was always getting people together, and they were always playing somewhere. And so my mother didn't have a whole lot of money when she was growing up, and so she really learned how to pinch pennies and make things happen. So when I was growing up, she was always doing the same thing. And so she was the kind of person who was always trying to help each other. They were very Catholic family. My mother was a catechism teacher, and she was always every single weekend figuring out exactly what she had to do. And I don't know what went through my head one time, but when I was little, somebody said, "What does your mother do?" And I said, "She doesn't work." I didn't know what my mom did. And then all of a sudden I was sick one day. I was homesick from school, and I see my mom, and she's baking and canning and cleaning the laundry and darning my dad's socks and doing all these other things. And I'm going, oh my God, she doesn't sit down the entire day. She's just really, really busy. And so it was so fun to see that side of my mom, because she was constantly doing something, getting ready, and it seemed like she was a whirlwind. And then all of a sudden, my dad would walk through the door, the dinner's ready on the table, and they would all sit down, and all of a sudden it was just like peace and quiet. And it was just amazing how everything sort of worked. So my dad, I talked enough about my mom. My dad grew up as a mechanic, working in his father's garage up in the UP. And so while he was up there, he started working in his own dad's garage. As soon as he could start working on stuff, he started fixing cars and fixing trucks and whatever he could. Well, they had the contract for the police vehicles. So he was always fixing the cars and going up and picking up the police vehicles and taking care of all of the vehicles and making sure they're in tip-top shape. So he goes in on his 16th birthday. He goes into the police station, and they go, "Bob, what you doing here today? I didn't know we had a vehicle that had to be picked up." He goes, "No, I'm here to get my first driver's license." And they looked at him and they said, "You've been driving our vehicles for the last 4 years. You don't have a driver's license?" He goes, "No, I'm turning 16 today." So the guy writes out a license and hands it to him and says, "Get out of here." So that was my dad. So then he would never hire anybody to do anything, because he had this collection, and some of you have the same collection, I know. He had this collection of how-to books. You know what I'm talking about? The how-to manuals before we had the internet, and the how-to manuals, there were huge there was sort of like the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it was how to fix. And so he would be a carpenter, he would be an electrician, he would be a plumber, he would do all of these things, and he would never hire anybody because he had 2 sons. So he would always say, "Come on, we're going to figure out how to fix this." Or, "Come here, we're going to figure out how to build this." And we were constantly having to do those kinds of things. So it was a great learning experience. And I remember him, because he was a mechanic and he would never hire anybody to fix a vehicle of his own, we lived in the UP, and he had so many tools, and he kept them in his garage. So that means none of our vehicles fit in the garage. So up in the UP in January and February, if his starter went out on the car, that thing had to be fixed by the next morning so he could get to work. So we would take snow and we would push it up against the car, so we'd have a wind block, crawl underneath the vehicle, start taking off the starters and putting on a new starter, and that's the way my dad was. It was, if I got to do it, I'm going to get it done. I have to do it now. We'd work until 4 in the morning trying to get this vehicle going so my dad could go to work the next morning. And so we were constantly enjoying life, constantly having a good time. So we thought we were the top of the top, right? Because we had so many cool things going for us. And then my 2 sisters decided, we always had this thing about going to college. My parents always wanted one of their kids to go to college. And so my sisters decided they didn't want to go to college, they wanted to get married right out of high school. So they did. My brother wanted to be a mechanic, so he just went and started to be a mechanic. And so I was the youngest of the family. It was my turn to go to college. I didn't have a choice at that point, but I didn't mind, because I loved music. And I thought, this is a chance that I can do something with music. So what happened was I started college, and very shortly after I started college, my mom came down with cancer. And when she came down with cancer, the prognosis wasn't good at all, and they gave her 3 months to live. and this was, I had just started college. And she didn't live 3 months, she lived for 3 weeks. And so I was up in the hospital with her when she passed away, and we were talking a lot. And one of the things that she said to me was, who's going to take care of the kids? Meaning her grandkids. I didn't have any grandkids at the time yet. And she said, who's going to take care of the children? I said, we are. We're here to help. You know, the next generations, we'll take care of them. Don't worry. They're in good hands. It was always her job to take care of everybody. And then she goes, who's going to take care of your father? And I said, we are. We're all in this together. And it wasn't until that night, because she was just agitated after she found out she had cancer. She was constantly agitated because she was afraid that everything wasn't going to get done because she wasn't doing it. And when she finally realized that we were all going to step up to the plate and we were all going to be there, she finally let it go, and that's the night she passed away. She closed her eyes and she didn't wake up again. And so a couple of weeks after that, I went home and I was talking to my dad at the dinner table, and he went into the bedroom and he comes out with this box, and inside of the box are a bunch of pictures that I had never seen before. And he opens up the box and it's of a Navy ship, and it's all of these people in uniform, and he starts telling me about being in the Navy and being on this ship. And I'd never seen this side of life before. I knew that he was in the military, but he had never talked about it. It was something that he never really wanted to talk about. And so he brings out this box and he starts talking for hours. And he's telling me about all the boys that he served with. And he's telling me about all the places that he had been. And he's talking to me about the ship. And his job, because he was a mechanic, his job was to keep the engine running. Him and his team, that was his job. If that engine broke down, it was bad shape. You know what happens in the Navy if your engine breaks down? You're a sitting duck. He said, I slept next to the engine. He said, that was my responsibility to keep it going along with the rest of the people on my team. That's what we did. And so he kept telling me these stories. Well then, I was realizing there was a whole part of my dad that I didn't know. I knew him as a father. I knew him as a mechanic and a carpenter and an electrician and all those kinds of things, but I never knew this side of him before. And so when I graduated from college, it was the second time I ever saw him cry. The first time was when my mom passed away. And he said, your mom is very proud of you. And so I got my first job down in Lower Michigan, and then it was in an inner city, and I decided, I want to get a little bit closer to family. I want to get back up to my dad, things like that. So I took the job in Hortonville. And when I took the job in Hortonville, I was close enough so my dad would come down for concerts. And he came down, I think the first concert he came down to, he was sitting in a chair, and all of a sudden this gentleman comes up to him and he says, are these seats taken? And my dad goes, no, feel free. And they started talking. And they got to talking about both being in the military, and they said, they hit it off. They ended up being friends. And it was Jim Foley and his wife. Oh. And that year, Jim then came up to me and said, would you play for the Memorial Day service? And I said, absolutely, without hesitation. Of course we're going to play for the Memorial Day service. That's what we do. We're a band. And so he came up and he said, you got a bugler for me? I said, absolutely. As long as I'm a band director, you will always have a bugle. No questions asked. If I don't have a student to go do it, I'll do it myself. And so Jim would come in on a regular basis and talk to me in my office. And whenever my father would come down for a concert, sometimes I think my father came down because he wanted to talk to Jim, not really come to my concert. But they were always sitting next to each other at the concerts, and they just hit it off really, really well. And then my dad would always come down for the Memorial Day service, and he loved everything that was happening. He joined the American Legion up in the UP after he met Jim, and he started getting more and more involved with that. And then my dad passed away a few years after that, and it was hard, and it was one of those things where I really had to sit down and think about all of the things that my dad was, and there was so much of it that I didn't know. And one of the things, when he was telling me that story, I sat back and I started listening about that military story that he was telling me, about being his military career. And I was trying to think, why did he bring it up at that moment? It was right after my mom died. But as an adult now, and thinking back on it, the reason he did it is because the life that he created after the military was always with my mom. And everything was involved with her and all the things that they did together. And he said, it hurts less when I think about times when we weren't together, because I can forget for a moment. And so the times that he could remember then was the time that he was in the military. So it felt good for him to talk to Jim Foley. It felt good for him to revise some of those memories, because it hurt so much to be missing my mom. And so he truly felt that the American Legion did a lot for him. And he also felt that the people that served were his brothers. And I will never, ever be able to understand completely what he feels, but you can. You know where he came from. You know him better than I do, because he was one of you. And so for all you've done and all you've given, I want to say thank you. From the bottom of my heart, you are truly my dad's brothers. So I have a song I'd like to sing for you. You know that I'm a musician. It's what I do. And so I've got a song that Toby Keith wrote. The only thing I'm mad about is that he wrote it before I did. It's a beautiful song, but it says exactly what my dad is. Bring your cajon.
No, I didn't.